Hey gang, Stephen Marshall, KYLandlordlaw.com, back with another update for you. It's May the 13th. That means that it is exactly 2 months since I've last been in court. And I'm getting lots of questions about when we're going to be able to get back in court, when evictions are going to be able to be filed again. So I wanted to give you an update on that because things are a bit of a mess right now and the clock is ticking. So here's where we stand. Last Friday, May the 8th, the governor kind of quietly issued a new executive order that ends up affecting landlords. The bulk of this new order addressed the reopening of businesses, and that's kind of what we all expected. But there was one little nugget tucked away in Section 7 that was new for us, and it stated that evictions from residential premises for failure to pay rent are suspended. Okay, and that sentence amended his order from March 25th that suspended all evictions. Okay, so here's kind of how the governor's position has progressed through time. Back March 25th, he suspended all evictions until he lifts the state of emergency. Then on April 3rd, he created this waiver system that allowed evictions to proceed against anyone who's engaged in dangerous criminal activity or who is a serious threat to public health if a waiver was granted by his deputy counsel. And that's been the status since April. Well, on Friday, he issues a new order that only residential evictions based on non-payment of rent are suspended, and all others may proceed. So what that tells us is we don't need to apply for a waiver with the governor's office anymore. And in fact, when you fill out their online waiver form now, you get a letter stating, and I quote, "The suspension of evictions only applies to evictions from residential premises for failure to pay rent. Evictions for other reasons may proceed subject to the orders of the Kentucky Supreme Court." Now, therein lies the rub, because the Kentucky Supreme Court closed our court system statewide to non-emergency hearings through the end of this month, May 31st. But they went on to say that they will not accept any eviction filings until 30 days after that, which puts us at July the 1st. So we've got this disconnect, this separation of powers issue, where on the one hand, the governor says, look, if it's not a residential property, you can proceed. Or if it's a residential property and the eviction is based on something other than non-payment of rent, you can proceed. But the courts are still saying we can't. Okay, and that, ladies and gentlemen, is the frustrating part. Okay, the courts throughout this entire process have been open for emergency proceedings. But even when the governor designated certain evictions as emergency proceedings, the Supreme Court still wouldn't let us file them. I've got one eviction that I've been waiting a month now to file, and I haven't been able to. And so now that our state is opening back up, and some of you folks have had tenants that have been engaging in dangerous behavior on your property and who have damaged your property and who are disturbing other tenants to the point that those tenants are leaving, the Supreme Court still will not let us file evictions, and that's frustrating. And I don't blame our local judges or our clerks for that. They are simply following the guidance they get from the top. And so at the top is where I lay the blame right now. And so if you'd like to reach out to the Kentucky Supreme Court and urge them to amend their order and allow our local courts to accept eviction filings, I think that's perfectly reasonable to do. Okay? The Kentucky Supreme Court justices are elected officials. They may respond to your concerns, they may not. But voicing your concerns to elected officials is always acceptable as long as you do it respectfully. So, I've said a lot to say this. Here's where we stand. The governor has said that only residential evictions based on non-payment of rent are suspended. All others can go forward. But the courts are not accepting any eviction filings at all right now. And that may not change until July the 1st. We'll just have to wait and see. So that's where we stand on evictions. Let me give you a few other quick notes. So on staffing requirements. Most of you saw the update to my last video on reopening of offices. But if you didn't see the update, the governor clarified that property management offices are not, I repeat, not required to comply with the 50% staffing directive. Okay? All of your employees are considered essential employees, and so you may fully staff your offices. Now, you still have to comply with all the other aspects of the Healthy at Work minimum requirements, but you do not have to comply with the 50% staffing directive. I told you last week I'd have an update on rent numbers for May, and they look good. They were better than the first week of April. And I'm using the National Multifamily Housing Council's National Rent Tracker, and according to that, 80.2% of tenants paid rent during the first week of May. Now, that's higher than April last month, which had us at 78% for the first week of May. It's just slightly below May of last year, which saw 81.7% of tenants pay their rent during the first week. So 80% of tenants paid rent during the first week of May. We'll see how the rest of the month goes, but that's a very good start. Very encouraging for both landlords and tenants. Next, I do expect the courts to actually open on June the 1st. Okay, I mentioned that there's these task forces out there for circuit, family, and district court. Each one has its own task force to figure out what reopening is going to look like. And the reports I'm getting from that task force are that we can expect the courts to actually open on June the 1st without further delay, unless something significant happens in the numbers, the COVID-19 numbers between now and then. Now, what's it going to look like when courts actually open? I don't know that, and it's going to kind of be left up to each court to figure that out. I do expect we're going to have to wear masks. I do expect they're only going to allow 33% occupancy inside. I do expect that lots of people are going to have to wait outside to get a message before they come in. And that might mean smaller dockets. I don't know right now. But it's very good news that they do, in fact, plan to reopen on schedule on June the 1st. Next, if you're on my email list, I asked you to participate in a landlord survey that was put together by the Lexington Fair Housing Council. It's a statewide survey for landlords. They are still collecting data on that, but please go ahead and fill out the survey if you haven't already. And I'll have a link in this post where you can access it. That survey is being used to make policy suggestions to our state and local officials. Okay, in fact, I got an email this morning from the Kentucky Supreme Court, and they had gotten a copy of the survey results. Okay, so we want to make sure that our voice is heard. It's a survey for landlords, so fill it out. Make sure that your voice is among the data that they're looking at. I'll also have a link in this post that you can look at the current results of that survey. And the survey results, in my estimation, are pretty encouraging as well. Next, a few weeks ago I told you about LIHEAP, where your low-income tenants can get assistance in paying their utilities. And if their utilities are included in their rent, that money will come directly to you as the landlord. Funding for that expired on April 30th, but it has been extended. So if you are in Lexington, Bourbon, Nicholas, one other county I always forget in this, those tenants are eligible, and I'll give you the phone number and email address for them to reach out to for further instructions. It's through the Community Action Council. But it's always good if we can get more money in our tenant's pocket. That means you're more likely to get paid your rent. And then last thing, May 19th, my final training webinar in the three-part series is going to go down. And I'm going to cover how to deal with domestic violence issues under Kentucky's new domestic violence law, under fair housing law, and under the Violence Against Women Act. Okay, that's $25 for members of our statewide apartment associations, and it's $40 for non-members. Okay, so it's a fantastic value. I did the last one on assistance animals, and again, it was $25 for members, $40 for non-members. I got questions that week, in the week since then, from people who didn't attend that they ended up paying me more to answer the one particular question when that question and many others were answered in the webinar. So it's a fantastic value. So make sure you get signed up, and I'll have a link in the post for that as well. So I think that's plenty for today. Next week, I'm going to have an update on the CARES Act, okay, and what you need to be doing right now to make sure that you're able to file evictions as soon as the courts open up. Because as most of you know, the CARES Act has broader restrictions and a longer suspension on evictions than the state does, but it only applies to certain properties. But everyone, when we go back to court, is probably going to have to show that they're not governed by the CARES Act in order to file evictions before the CARES Act suspension ends. So I'm going to talk about that and give you some directions on what you can do to begin preparing to show that. So that's it for today. Until then, if you need me, send an email to smarshall@trippleslaw.com or call me on my cell. Guys, that's it. Have a fantastic rest of your week.